Hi, everybody. This is Russell Moore, and this is Reading in Exile, where we go around my library here where I'm sheltering in place and hunkered down, pull books off, and talk about them. And today I wanted to answer a question because one of you asked in the comments, actually, a couple of you did, how do you know when to reread something? And I think it might have been because I mentioned having read something several times or having reread something recently. Maybe there was a person who said that that I had said to keep Brothers Karamazov from being too intimidating to read it twice. That's not what I said. Well, kind of. Well, what I said was read it in more translation than one, and you'll get a better sense of it as you're reading it. So I guess kind of. But somebody said, how do you know when to reread something? Do you often reread something? And I think there are a couple of layers to that question. And so let me answer it. I mean, the first sort of unspoken layer there is, I think there are some people who think, well, I just don't retain things that I read. I've heard people have that sort of worry, and I've heard other people say, well, I don't think that people who read a lot retain what it is that they read. And what I would say to you is don't worry about what you're retaining. If what you mean by that is you've got like an annotated list in your mind of remembering what it is that you have read, that's not what's important. What's important and some of you do. Some of you have like a photographic memory where I've known people who can say on page 119 of Walker Percy's Moviegoer, he says, well, if you do that, great. Most people can't, though, and I certainly can't. But the issue of reading a book is not like you're packing something up and putting it somewhere. Is that the book is changing you and altering you, not just the text of the book, but the mental process of your sort of arguing with the book maybe at places or wondering about things in the book. So it's changing you and shaping the way that you see and think. So you don't necessarily need to retain, by that definition, even good books. And that's also one of the things, sometimes this is a tangent, I know, but sometimes people ask me about Bible memorization and they feel guilty because there are a lot of people who can like memorize entire books of the Bible. And I can't do that. If I sit down and say, I'm going to memorize Romans 1:1 and then Romans 1:2 and then Romans 1:3, my mind doesn't work that way. Now, do I have a lot of the Bible memorized? Yes. But it's because I've read it so much and I've been in it so much and I've lived in it. So I know what's in John 12 and what's in Genesis 15 and what's in Jeremiah 6, just because I've been in it a lot, not because I've tried to memorize it. So it depends on how your mind is set up. So when it comes to rereading, there are going to be some things that I start to read, I get halfway through it, and say, this is really of no value to me, and I give it to somebody who might like it, or get rid of it in some way or the other. There are going to be other things like this. This is a book that I had when I was a kid. 101 Reasons Why. Man, they missed an opportunity for 88. But 101 Reasons Why Christ Will Return by 1988. I kept this just so that I can kind of remind myself doomsday prophets are always around, and but I'm never going to reread it. There are going to be other things that I reread, and I normally do this where I take something that I've read before and I have sort of a project over 6 months to a year to reread that. So right now, I'm rereading the first volume of Lord of the Rings and intentionally doing it slowly so that I won't let myself read more than a half chapter in a day, and sometimes not even that much, because I want to kind of mull it over. I mean, just like with anything else, you're going to read stuff at different speeds and interact with stuff in different ways. I tend to read quickly, That's no virtue. People who read slowly do so, and often read a lot more, or read a lot better in some ways. But most everybody reads at different speeds. So there are some things that you can start to read, and just because you're so captivated by it, it carries you along a lot quicker. And then some things you're saying, I just really need to slow down and see this bit by bit by bit. I mean, at least I do the Bible that way. If I'm starting a book of the Bible, I want to read the whole chapter relatively quickly so that I can get the same experience that I would have if I were sitting at the church at Ephesus and having that letter read to me. So I've got the whole holding together in one sitting, and then I want to move through it more slowly after that, and sort of verse by verse and chapter by chapter. A lot of reading is like that. So right now I'm reading through this very slowly. After that, I'm going to reread Dostoyevsky's Crime and Punishment. It's been a while since I've read it, so I'm going to do that afterward. Right now, I'm reading in Community, and I'll probably talk about this later, but T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. I've read it many times over my life, but a group of us, Andrew Peterson, Ben Shive, Ian Cron, get together as often as we can. Most of them are musicians, and the rest of us are, often traveling. And one time when all our travel schedules are canceled, we can't physically get together. But we read through Four Quartets and talk about it, and then spring off of that into everything else. That's a good thing to do if you can do it. Then there are going to be other things that because I mark them, I'll be able to go back, take something off the shelf, and say, why did this matter to me when I read it? So then I'll just sort of flip around to where I've marked, where I've highlighted, and I can get a sense of what mattered to me at that time. So somebody asked about Carl Henry's A Plea for Evangelical Demonstration the other day. I could pick it up, and just seeing the parts that I highlighted could sort of remind me and refresh me of what Dr. Henry's argument was. Or there may be times when I'm wanting to go to a particular place. So there's a line in King Lear. This is actually William Shakespeare's birthday and death day. They think birthday, but definitely death day. And King Lear is my favorite Shakespeare play. There are a couple of quotations in King Lear that I was going to reference in something that I was working on. I have that marked. I can go back. And while I was there, I was just flipping around and seeing what I had highlighted, and it brings a lot back to me. When I did the Reading in Exile on Buechner, same thing. I didn't reread everything, but I went through and said, let me find some spots that I'd marked before. Now, sometimes what I do when I'm rereading something, because you're a different person in a lot of ways, different stages of your life, is to get a completely different copy. Rarely, but I do this sometimes. Completely different copy. Don't look at the one that I marked up before, and then compare. What stood out to me at one point that didn't at another. And there are a lot of things that previously would have seemed irrelevant to me that now matter a lot just because of what's happened in my life, and vice versa. Or sometimes I'll read a review. This is one, The Romance of American Communism, which I read a long time ago. And I don't think it made that much of an impression on me. It was just sort of a psychological study of what people thought they were doing when they joined the Communist Party USA, and how they rationalized Stalin and all of those things. But I saw a review by Ron Radosh in The Bulwark maybe a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, where he's talking about the fact that this book actually romanticized or gave too much credit to the people who were drawn into communism, because the way she frames it is they're idealistic people who just sort of willed themselves not to know what was going on, and he's saying there's a glossiness there. So she's acting like something was good and then it went off the rails. And he is somebody who is formerly in communist circles and saw it for what it is, says that's a dangerous conception of communism. Well, because it didn't make much of an impression on me, I pulled it out again and just read specific parts of it to say, oh, okay, I see exactly what he's saying there in this part and that part. But I didn't reread the whole thing. There are going to be things that you have that you sort of go back to that way. All right, this is Reading in Exile. What do you want us to talk about here? And we'll be back in the library tomorrow.